I think we're recording now.
Okay, I'll trust you.
Okay, so welcome to this first embedded video in the John F. T. Taff newsletter. We're both excited to be talking to you today and to talking to each other. So you know why you're here, obviously, and I am going to be speaking today with a good friend of mine, Doug Murano. And you might have known Doug Murano from projects like Gutted and Behold and Shadows Over Main Street. But Doug has got a lot of things going on. And he's a great guy, someone who I really admire in the industry. So we're going to have this lovely little chat about what's going on and what Doug's up to. And I think you're going to be interested. So I'll turn this over to Doug now, and we'll find out a little bit more about Doug and where he's coming from, and then we'll get into it. So take it away, Doug.
Hi, as John said, my name is Doug Murano, and I'm an editor and anthologist. I've been working in the business for, I don't know, a decade now. Doesn't that sound crazy? A decade?
Yeah, I know, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, as John said, I've edited some books that fans of indie horror may have read. Gutted, Beautiful Horror Stories, and Behold, Oddities, Curiosities, and Undefinable Wonders, both of which featured stories by my friend John here. So he and I have been working together for a long time too, and so I'm really pleased to be here on his newsletter, embedded in your minds and in your souls and wherever else.
Tell the story, just as a way to break the ice a little. Tell the story of how we met.
Okay,
so
yeah, it was in Atlanta, right? Yeah, and so it was one of my first Stoker cons, and I was pretty new in the business. I'd just come off of Shadows Over Main Street with D. Alexander Ward, and he and I were cooking up this crazy idea for a book of beautiful horror stories, and like we didn't really know if it was going to work or what we were doing, and but I knew that I wanted to work with John because I had read The End in All Beginnings, and I'd heard such great things about it. And so I kind of hat in hand came up to John's table and just kind of like cold pitched him right there at the table. I don't, it's one of those things where, I think if I had been more experienced in the business, that's not something that I would have done. But I'm glad that I was new enough to not know better, because it led so many great places and a wonderful working relationship and a wonderful friendship. I don't know, what did you think about that, John?
Well, I was scared to death. I fancy myself that I'm a pretty good judge of character. And I think I am, because I think that the people that I make connections with have all proven to be really good, not just in terms of business, but also in terms of who they are as a person. And I think probably what I remember most from that date, when we met, was that just how excited you were about, being there and about meeting people and about the project. And I think that when you are going to work with somebody on a project, submitting a story or whatever, to have the other person really excited about the project and about what's going on and what they're going to do, that's infectious. So that's really what attracted me, is like, here's this guy, I don't know him that well, but I see some of the authors that he's had in the first book, the first Shadows Over Main Street, and very excited about the project. And I thought, I think it's a great idea. I thought it was a great idea right off the bat. I mean, Gutted had such a great, to the point elevator pitch that you used, that I'm like, I immediately saw what you're trying to do. I immediately saw that you were very excited about it. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me.
When John says very excited, I imagine me as like the little dog and John like the big bulldog, and I'm like, where are we going, John? Where are we going? John's like, get out of here, kid. You're bothering me. No, kidding.
No, it was good. And, I happened to have a story that I had just done. Well, I think I didn't have it completely finished, but and it seemed perfect for the book, and I think it was perfect for the book.
Oh God, yeah. And in all honesty, John, you and Deb made me feel so at home in Atlanta, and you kind of took me under your wing and made me feel much more confident about the way forward. Because not at that time, it was 2016, 2015 actually is when we had our discussion.
Right.
And it was sort of this. I'm glad you thought the elevator pitch was good, because I was still trying to figure it out. You should have heard Dee and I talk about what this book was going to be. It's like, it's the feeling you get when you see a shark, take a seal off the top of the water, or a ball of snakes having sex, or like tornadoes coming down. It's sort of like, and that became awe meets ache, terror meets transcendence, regret gives way to rebirth. But when you're in the process of it, you don't know, you have no frame of reference for it.
Right.
Nobody else at the time was doing anything like that. I think since then, I mean, don't want to toot my own horn, but there have been several beautiful horror stories books that have come out since 2016. I like to think Dee and I had a little something to do with that.
Oh, sure.
But at the time, it felt crazy. It was sort of like, it's sort of like love. What is beautiful horror? You know it when you see it, right? And it was very clear that you were doing that in The End and All Beginnings.
Yeah.
Sort of that really emotionally driven, character driven, just wonderfully, beautifully written horror. And you're right, Cards for His Spokes, Coins for His Fare was perfect fit. And it was one of those that, I knew it was perfect because I cried every time I read it. And I don't know whether that's a great pitch, for your readers, but it really is for me. The thing you got to realize, and you've been through this too, John, is when you're an anthologist, you read those stories so many times that it's easy to get numb to them. And I knew there was something special with yours and a lot of the stories in that book, because they just destroyed me every single time.
Yeah.
And so, when you sent that story and when you, that's an odd sound. Is that a phone?
That's my Star Trek communicator phone.
Oh, that's awesome. But honestly, to have your support early on, your kindness, and then your amazing story, it's like, what better thing for a young anthologist to have in his corner? And it really bolstered me for all the work to come, because I knew at that point that, like, okay, this is a real thing. I'm not just crazy. We can pull this off. And I wasn't just imagining that beautiful horror was a thing. It's something that we've tapped into.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. And I think that, that was so foundational. That book was so foundational for you in your development as an anthologist. But it was also pretty helpful to me to know that the stuff that I was doing in The End and All Beginnings, and that story that I'd written, Cards for Your Spokes, Coins for Your Fare, that direction I was going on was something that was legitimate. You know what I mean? That people were looking for that, not just editors, but also readers. And I, obviously Gutted struck a chord once it was out there. So yeah, it was a serendipitous thing. And I think that led certainly to our friendship, which is great. I mean, if it had just been the book, yeah, that's great. It would, great book comes out of it. That's fantastic. But this relationship that you and I have that's to me, the book was the icing on the cake. The cake is the friendship. So
absolutely. And just the opportunity to continue to learn and grow together over the years. And, here we are still making trouble.
So when you had the idea when you got into this as an anthologist, what was your intention? What were you trying to do, and why did you choose the role of putting an anthology together rather than writing? Because I know you've done some fiction work too.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you choose that instead of like writing some stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it really comes down to practicality and opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. I'd written a couple of dozen short stories coming out of grad school, shopped them around, made some professional sales. I actually had a little bit of momentum going, and but things change a little bit when you start to have a family.
Right.
And my wife and I had 4 children in pretty rapid succession, and so I realized pretty quickly that there wasn't a good way for me to sustain the attention that I needed
Mm-hmm.
to write fiction. It was a different type of attention, but and this is a long story that I'm going to skip. But D. Alexander Ward is 100% responsible for the opportunity part because he came.
Another great person.
Yeah, he's awesome. Great friend of mine and just a wonderful individual. Read everything with his name on it.
Absolutely.
But he came to me with the original idea for Shadows Over Main Street. And I looked at that as an opportunity, and really long story short, looked at that as an opportunity to be able to stay involved in the business and the genre that I love, but to be able to do it in like 15-minute increments, while the baby was asleep or, while I had the energy to do this. And so it turned out to be a really good fit though, because what I realized was that as much as I love writing, I love working with writers more and developing talent. And I know that, again, knowing what I know now, I may have done it differently, but I'm glad I didn't know.
Right.
Because it sounds a little presumptuous to be working with some of the best authors who ever put pen to paper and think that you've got a role in coaching them or improving them. But it's not so much even that as how much fun I was having with it.
Right.
And so you kind of have to trust a writer to do their thing in a certain sense.
Yeah.
But you can, the role that I can play is, I feel like I have a really, I have a talent for putting together stories that go together. I have a talent for seeing talent and potential, and then for encouraging that and nurturing it into the right sort of vein.
Right.
Because I've grown as a technical editor over the past 10 years, but I think where I really do well is when I believe an author is doing what they were meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
I have a way to say, this is what you need to be doing. This is the rabbit you need to be chasing, and helping an author define that for themselves.
Right.
Is one of my favorite things to do in this process. And I've been able to accomplish that with writers of all experience levels, and for whatever reason, and I haven't been able to figure this out yet, but writers trust me with that, and I don't take it for granted. But it just seems to be one of those things that I'm really fortunate that I had the opportunity to do, because it wasn't on the top of my list coming into the business, right? Like,
right.
But sometimes when you change tracks and you look for other opportunities, you find out that other things are just a better fit. And so I don't know if that makes sense, John, but
it does. And
yeah.
Coming at this as an author who has worked with you on a number of projects, I think what you said there is entirely accurate. Being an anthologist is more than just having an open call and getting a bunch of stories and deciding the 10 or 12 or 15 that you like. It's having the talent and the vision for looking at each individual author's contributions, and then helping that author extract the very best out of the story that they possibly can do. And in doing that, you've got to deal with so many different types of personalities and egos and approaches to writing. It's not just that the stories are different in an anthology. You're dealing with every one of those contributions as a person behind it who's completely different. You might have somebody who's very affable and easygoing and easy to work with, but you might have some people who are kind of prickly and fight more for the stuff that they believe in, even if the editor has got a different idea. So I think having the kind of personality and the kind of talent that can do all of that and deal with all those kind of people and make them all feel good about the process that they're undergoing for the story and then the final outcome. That's a talent. And I've been doing this for 30 years, 30 some odd years. And I've worked with a lot of people. And I can count on that many fingers, the number of people right now who I work with regularly, who I trust. And you're one of them. You're at the top of the list.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
And that's a big deal for me because I think it's one thing to have an editor or an anthologist that you work with that you like, because I got a lot of people I like, but to have that trust that, if this person comes to me, like if you come to me, and you have recently with the story that we're working on for Hideous Book of Hidden Horror, you had some cogent notes for that story that I took. And I took them without arguing with you because I trust you, and the notes seemed good. They were good notes. I mean, they made sense to me. So, I guess what I'm saying from the other side of the chair, it's rare to have a person like you that has that collection of talents and is able to do what you're doing very smoothly. So
I
yeah,
appreciate
it
that.
Great deal of sense to me what you said.
Thank you. And I think the other part of your question is, what am I trying to get at? In doing this, and that's been a process. So coming off of Shadows over Main Street, that was definitely Dee's baby, and I was happy to go along for that ride.
Right.
I thought he had a brilliant idea and a wonderful sensibility, and quite frankly, more background in Lovecraftian fiction than I had at the time.
Right.
So he's just kind of an encyclopedia for that stuff. And so where I hit my turning point, and you touched on that earlier, was with Gutted, Beautiful Horror Stories.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you're just starting this in anything, I think you want to get to that point as soon as possible where you're like, you get the chance to say, this is what I believe about horror, or this is what I believe about whatever it is that I'm doing.
Right.
And so Gutted is my answer to that. And I believe that, and you'll see this throughout everything that I do, is that it's not interesting to me unless there's tension between two things.
Right.
And seemingly opposite things. And I believe in the core of me is that beautiful horror sense, and you can't really explain it, but you just, again, it's like love, when you see it. So, and this is not a pitch, but if you really want to know what that means, read Gutted.
Right.
I can't sit here and tell you what it means, but it's there.
Well, the book speaks for itself, because I think that you, like I said, you had a great elevator pitch, and the idea was solid, and it was easily expressed. When you told me the idea, I was like, oh, I get it immediately. I know immediately what you're doing. So, but if you're a reader and you're kind of not like, what is beautiful horror? What does that mean? Get the book and read it. I mean, a story in, and you will like, oh, I totally get it. Totally.
There it is. Yep, there it is. And I think that's the other thing that I come to this from a different place than a lot of anthologists do. For me, the books are a means to find something out. It's not just, I want to create a book under this theme. It's I think something's going on here. I think there's something inside of me, and I think there's something going on inside of horror, and I want to find out where those meet, and I want to answer questions. And so, at the risk of sounding, too grandiose about it, like for me, these anthologies are as much art that for me, as they are art that the authors produce, because I'm trying to get at something that I can't express any other way.
Right.
And I think that's one of the definitions of art, right? Like, if you talk about it, you wouldn't write the song or paint the picture, or
exactly.
And so I'm trying to unearth something that I believe about storytelling or life or horror, but I'm sort of doing it via my cast of authors. And through that process of soliciting and editing and then milling it down into a final product, I find out, okay, well, how close was I to my original thought?
Sure.
Like, I'm testing these ideas out through experiments that I'm running on authors in some ways.
Right.
And so it's really a matter of asking questions. And that's kind of how I try to come to the editorial process too, is, what is it that makes this book what it is? What's the little diamond at the center of Jupiter?
Right.
Makes this book what it is. But then to answer that question 17 times, it's what makes you the writer that you are, because that's what I want. That's the only way I can get to my answer, is if you give me the essence of who you are.
Well, this is going to turn into probably already has turned into a mutual admiration society meeting. But again, being an author and having that way that you look at the stories, and not, what I've experienced over 30 years is some editors who will edit they approach it with kind of a uniformity. So they're not looking at each individual story and each individual author and the voice that they bring to the table. They're kind of editing it in a flat kind of way. You know what I mean? That they're looking for a certain flatness of tone, and so they edit things down to that tone, and that's kind of a style of editing that I don't like. I don't like working with, and it's kind of an editor who doesn't, I think, understand what they're doing. So I think that, the thing with you was, yes, that initial enthusiasm and that energy that you brought when you talked about Gutted with me, but then in working with you, in over the course of what, 4 books now, that touch that you bring, that, this is a story I like. I've bought it for this anthology, but here's some things that I think you could do to really tighten it up and really heighten the message that you're trying to do through the story. I love that. I love working with somebody who gets it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the feeling is mutual, and it's good to have that level of trust. That's really what makes this worth doing, is how do you maximize the working relationship with each author? And one of my favorite things to do, and I didn't always do this, but more recently, one of my favorite things to do is just pick up the phone and call an author. And there are authors that I've done this to. I'll say I've done this to, that I've never talked to before in real time in my life, and I'll just say, I'm thinking about some things with your story. Like, let's just jam it out. Let's just talk. And we'll do that. And I think I did that 4 or 5 at least times with stories in the Hideous Book of Hidden Horrors. And it was a wonderful experience, because again, to me, that's a way to, like, you get a certain sense of what's important to the author about that story. It's you can't edit a story well, I think, unless you know that. Like, what is the intent and the most important thing to that author about this story. And you don't have to pick up the phone and call. Like, I'm not saying editors who don't do that are bad. it seems to me that it helps me to build the empathy needed to build that trust and ask the right questions. And you kind of get a sense of, you get a different sense of when somebody will pause and then consider, or whether they're excited about the changes, or whether they really understand. And so that's kind of a newer tool in my toolbox that I've really enjoyed, because there's an energy there too.
Yeah.
When you can get to a place where you're both excited of, and we'll say, okay, these are the things that we want to accomplish in the next rewrite. Let's friggin' do it. It's there's nothing better than that.
Well, it makes it more personal. It makes the process more personal, rather than just looking at a story and making some notes in the file and sending it back. I think it makes it easier to understand, for both sides to understand what the vision for the story is, and then to move on from that. So I think that's a great tool.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to, again, you being aware of the fact that each story is a personal thing, a personal voice, a personal answer to the question that you asked. That is the basis of the anthology,
Yeah.
So I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And, for example, the just shifting to a little bit more recent project, and I don't know how political you want me to get, but the
Bring it on. We agree, so bring it on.
yeah, the little diamond at the center of the hideous book of hidden horrors was that feeling. I'm a progressive in South Dakota, and it was that sense that you wake up one day and you feel surrounded. Now, as a straight white man, I am not used to feeling that way. Okay. And it gave me insight into the lives of people who feel like that every day.
Right.
And those are people that I want to support and fight for. And it just really made me think, like, okay, well, I guess the shoe is on the other foot. I don't always feel safe.
Right.
And I thought I knew my home, but I guess I don't.
Right.
And it made me think again about, what does that mean for other people?
Yeah.
What does that mean for me? How do I work through that? And I think another person who is in my position may write their own story or write a book about it. But I wanted to do an anthology because I wanted to hear from people.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear from a diverse group of writers. What does that mean to you? And I didn't get that exact answer from everybody, and I don't want that exact answer, because that's my question, right? But I did get versions of that. What does that question look like to them? And so it's an interesting negotiation once you start to get into that process, because you have to hold on to the center of gravity for where you started, but also allow for what, maybe that's not the question for this person. Maybe it's similar, maybe it still fits, but maybe it's just a different flavor. And so for me, it was a really interesting exercise, because we have a huge diversity of authors in that book, from a lot of different backgrounds, facing a lot of different life challenges, and it became a learning experience for me, and it helped me to answer that question. What does that feel like?
Right.
What is it like when there are things underneath you that you didn't know were there, but could change everything for you in an instant? And so it was a way for me to kind of work through those feelings,
Right.
and also invite others to do the same thing, to share in that process of working through what that question means.
Right. I think the thing that's always struck me about your books is that when you tell me what the book is about, what you tell me, when we first started talking about Hideous Book of Hidden Horrors, and you know, I got it immediately. I mean, all of the books that I've worked with you on, I got the idea of what you were trying to do immediately. And a lot of times, with me as an author where I am right now, I don't submit a lot because I find the process annoying. And a lot of times you're submitting to anthologies that are very specific. They're looking for something very specific, and I don't like to write to that usually because the thought of then if it's rejected, which I'm not certainly. I don't consider myself to be in a position that anything I put out there is going to be bought. So, and then you're stuck with a story that's very specific but your stories have always been easy to, your anthologies have always been easy to understand. And even when I go into it before I hear you tell me what the anthology is about, and I think I don't really have anything for that, I don't have an idea about it. Once I hear where you're going, I've always been able to go, oh, I get that immediately. And oh, yeah, I think I can do something on that. Or, oh, here's an idea I have immediately that seems to fit with that. So I don't know if that's kismet or luck or, you have a really great way of explaining what you're doing, but it's always worked. With Hideous Book of Hidden Horrors, I didn't have anything laying around. But when you told me the idea, when you told me the central tenet of the book, I came up with the story that I came up with, and it worked. So, yay.
Yeah, absolutely, it did, and I think in a really timely way. I don't want to give away too much, but the central question is who helps the helpers,
right?
And think about all of the scenarios that could apply to in the past 2 years with pandemic and politics and
Yeah.
wars and it's that hidden trauma that a lot of us are going through and don't have the tools or the means or the opportunity to deal with it because we're still slogging through
Right.
the trauma.
Right.
And
yeah. The good thing about that was I didn't realize that about the story that I'd written until you mentioned it. When you brought up that idea, after you'd read the story, I could see what you read in the story, and it made sense to me. And then so the little tweaks that you had me do made perfect sense because I saw immediately what you saw in the story and where you thought it was going. So that made it really, really easy for me as an author to hone to get the best out of that story. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I speak John Taff.
Yeah, you do. You speak it very well, my friend. Speak it
So
very
yeah,
well. But
I appreciate that.
I think that the good thing about working with an editor like you, and like I said, David is one, Tony at Gray Matter is one, the late Patrick Beltran was one. Um, you know, I knew that when the story went through the process after it was bought, that it was going to be the best story that it possibly could be. That there was no, sometimes I send stories out into the ether that I think it's okay. It'll probably do well. And maybe it goes through an editing process that's not as tight as I might like, or, not what I'm accustomed to. But I don't think it's going to embarrass me when it comes out. But I don't have any of those worries when I work with you and those other people that I had mentioned, that I know that the story that comes out the other end is something I'm going to be very proud with. Mark Matthews is another one, because he's top of mind. That book of his, Orphans of Bliss, is going to be out in a week or two, and I've got a story in that too that Mark's process as an editor and an anthologist is incredibly easy. It's easy to go through, and I trust Mark. So, why Bad Hands? Why did you decide to make that leap from have a gun, will travel kind of anthologist, going to whatever publisher is willing to foot the bill for it, to actually being the publisher and having that entire other level of stress and worries to consider when you're putting a book out?
Ironically, or maybe not ironically, but I'm going to challenge your assumptions a little bit. Actually, the level of stress, having brought everything in, is way less.
Okay.
And that might sound strange, but I don't like situations where I have to put where the buck doesn't stop with me. That doesn't mean I'm a control freak.
Right.
But it does mean that I like to take responsibility for whatever it is that I'm doing.
Right.
Okay. And truth be told, and this is kind of an open secret, but for a lot of the anthologies that I've done, I've kind of played that role with Gutted and Behold. I've made contact with the authors. I've commissioned the artwork. I've run the publicity. I've boosted the posts. I've identified the audiences. At some point you realize that it's stupid to ask for somebody to hand you a bag of money to do everything.
Keep talking. I gotta grab a pug.
Yeah, and then to give them a percentage. I mean, I don't mean to sound like such a mercenary, but I just sort of figured if I'm going to be doing this myself, hey, buddy.
Sadie. She's my blind deaf pug.
Oh, what a sweetie. So it's really a practical matter. I was even investing some of my own funds into these books to get them made. And so it just, with all of that in mind, I just didn't like having to navigate someone else's agenda. And that's not a knock on anybody, but I would just, all things being equal, if I'm going to be negotiating contracts with agents, reaching out to solicit, basically running the marketing apparatus on the back end, then I should be reaping those rewards. And as a businessman, it made sense. As a creative professional, it made a ton of sense. Because then I'm not waiting on, oh, can we fit you in here in our schedule or whatever? Because the schedule is mine, and I get to do whatever I want.
Right.
And so that's attractive.
I think when you lay it out that way, it makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah.
Because I always knew in the other projects that you were way more involved in the back room stuff than you would normally be as an anthologist. A lot of that stuff that you were doing, most of the time is left up to the publisher to do. But I think that, one of the things that has always impressed me about you is that, when the book is published, you don't fade away. I mean, there's a whole portion of this that occurs after the book hits the market with reviews and, that kind of stuff. So I've always thought that you handled that really, really well. That
Thank you.
It wasn't just, the book's out, I'm off to my next project.
Yeah, I can't do that. I can't do that. I want it to find readers, and I want my authors to be glad that they did this.
Right.
Like, that's the only way that it works, is if people are happy. And I probably ask more from my authors than other anthologists do. I try to build a bit of a street team with my authors. I'll create a private Facebook group, or I have done that in the past, where I'll feed everybody talking points or content related to the book, and then ask them to leverage their platforms, and their audiences to spread the word. And that's been a really good model. And I think if everybody feels like they have skin in the game, then that's the ideal here. But yeah, it was really just kind of time to take the mask off and just say, hey, I'd rather do this under my own brand now.
Right.
But in terms of why Bad Hand, it was kind of a joke, like, excuse me. So a couple of years ago, in 2018, I abruptly lost my day job.
Right.
And was kind of spent a little bit of time in financial free fall. And it was always it became a joke in my mind that kind of kept me going, because I was in the middle of working on Miscreations at the time. And I said to myself, if I do another one of these, then I'm going to do it on my own, and I'm going to call it Bad Hand Books, because I felt like at that point I'd kind of been dealt a bad hand, and it was sort of like a cosmic middle finger.
Right.
Like I thought, well, if I'm going to get a bad hand, then I'm going to put it on a T-shirt, right? Like just.
And it worked. It looks great.
Yeah, and just so it became it started out as a joke, like a really bitter joke, and then I thought, well. That's absolutely what I'm going to have to do, because, then I thought about all the different bad hands in horror fiction, from the monkey's paw to Ash's hand to, Thing in the Addams Family and Idle Hands. And I thought, okay, there's something there that works in a couple of different ways. And, as I mentioned before, it's got to have that, right? It's got to have the multidimensionality, and there's got to be a tension there for it to work. And it makes me laugh that, the banner under which I want to, take on the horror world started out as a joke to myself, but I think it fits. It fits.
Oh, I think so too. So the first thing you're going to have coming out is the Hideous Book of Hidden Horror. So tell me a little bit about why that book, what the idea is a little bit. We touched on it a little earlier, but tell me a little bit more about that and why you chose that particular anthology to lead off.
Well, that was another project that started off with another press. I had a commitment from some folks, and then reached out to a bunch of authors, and sort of had egg on my face when that press was no longer. But I'm stubborn, and so I thought it was a good idea. I had a great lineup of authors who were committed. But more than that, again, it was this question that I was trying to answer for myself. I was feeling not great about the state of the world. I was feeling not great about the state of South Dakota, and trying to work through my own psychological landscape of how much did I really know about this place? Born and raised here, raising my family here, and all of a sudden you feel the ground shift under you, and I wasn't comfortable with it, and so I stuck with the book because I knew that was the question I wanted answered. And I couldn't let it go. I mean, I think novelists or short story writers probably have a similar experience with when there's an idea and it's like, that's the idea. That's the one. I will not move on to anything else until I get this out of my system. And so, I had some of the work done for the book already. But it made sense to me to kick off the lineup with something that meant a lot to me personally. And again, it's sort of on brand, right? Like it's a project that really tried to shit the bed, and And so, but it's up from the ashes, and it's
Sure.
really, it's looking, I think a lot of people will say this, but who are in creative fields, but I think it's the best anthology that I've ever put my name on.
That's
I'm
great.
really proud of the way that the authors came together and brought their best. They understood the theme, but they also interpreted it in ways that were surprising and delightful and horrifying. Um, and
So,
so
in
it's just
addition
this
to
serendipity.
myself,
Yeah.
who's in it? Who are some
Oh,
of the
so
other authors that are in it?
we have Lee Murray,
Hmm.
the Bram Stoker award-winning author and editor from New Zealand. We've
Right.
got Josh Mallerman, Gabino Iglesias, Cynthia Pelayo, Haley Piper, Richard Thomas. I'm not going to be able to name everybody just off the
Now,
top of my
that's
head,
but that right there, that's a kind of a cross section
right.
of the industry right now. So I think that's and I know I've seen all the authors that are in it myself. So it's a great TOC. It's a fantastic TOC that you were able to put together. And
Thank you.
just from my own perspective, I'm very proud to have a story that had a story that that you drug out of me. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and we managed to also get director and filmmaker Josh Rubin to do
right,
the foreword. He was the director of Werewolves Within and writer, director, and lead actor in
right,
Scare Me, that's on Shudder, and um, so he understands that tension between horror and comedy, the light and the
right,
dark, and the hidden and the obvious. And if you see his films, you'll know why I asked him
right.
to
When's
contribute
that
to
going to
his
be out?
the Hidden Horrors.
Yeah,
June 28th. We bumped it back just a little bit, but it'll be Tuesday, June 28th is the release date for that.
great. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that. The cover is fantastic, and I know you shared that in social media. The list of authors is fantastic. Yeah, I can't wait to read all the stories. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really strong anthology this year.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we've got a really exciting year and a half planned for Bad Hand Books. I've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes
Right.
on making a splash. And John, you know a lot about this. I've kind of spilled the beans to you, but uh, we've got a novella length work from Eric LaRocca coming out this October.
Fantastic.
If you've read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which is delightfully twisted.
Oh yeah,
I'm going to cough for a second here. I'm
that's
going to mute.
good.
Yeah. We have a novella length work of interconnected stories called They Were Here Before Us from Eric coming out in October.
It's great.
And it's highly disturbing, emotionally devastating, wonderful, wonderful fiction. And so those, the 1-2 punch of the anthology and then Eric's work coming out this year, I think is going to give Bad Hand a pretty solid start in the business. And then we've got some completely bonkers things happening
Right.
in 2023, hopefully. Um, those things are all coming together, including um, a series of novellas that feature an established character that a lot of fans of the genre are going to know from an author that I just love working with. So
Yeah, you're
uh,
you're gonna generate a lot of interest with that.
I
Uh,
hope so. I
yeah,
hope so.
and then there may be some other things that you and I will work on.
Absolutely. I didn't want to mention it, but you and I are, I still want to let the cat out of the bag too soon, but John, you're working on some things for me, and I'm taking a look at some things, and
Yep.
um, there could be some more mischief uh, between the two of us. I know there will be. So I'm very, very excited about that. Hopefully, by the end of next year, we'll be able to explore what that means and what
Yep.
exactly that looks like. So any chance to work with you is a chance that I relish. So
Well, and I feel the same way. You know that. Well, yeah. And here's the thing: when you work with authors, what's the thing that excites you most about working with an author on a story, and what is it exactly that attracts you to certain authors?
I really enjoy working with authors who um, try to expand the size and shape of the box.
Yeah.
So, you and Josh and Haley and Gabino, and you just have to look at one of my tables of
Yeah.
contents
Oh, yeah. Right.
to understand. Um, I my battle cry is always, not every story in an anthology that I make is going to be my favorite story, and that's okay. But I
Right.
know it will be someone's favorite story,
Sure.
and that's how I try to design these. So I try to, of course, there are the stories and the authors that just move me, right? But I'm more interested in, does this author look like they're trying to do something interesting with the time that they have?
Right.
Are they challenging convention in some way? And so I don't know. For me, it's just the opportunity to get in on something new,
Hmm.
be a part of the eternal song or howl of horror, that goes from
Right.
the Bible to today. um, but to answer that question another way, I really like to get under the hood with authors who are game for that, and you're one of
Right.
them. There was, I'm not gonna mention whose story this was, but in the hideous book Hidden Horrors, there was an opportunity to work with an author, and we cut over 1,000 words from their story
Oh, wow.
together. And it was one of those things where I kind of took a whack, and then we had a conversation about it, and then and so it was the opportunity to do something daring to the point
Hmm.
of just absurd, but to have a reason behind it and to go through that exercise together and see what happened. Sort of like you have different cuts of a film. You have the
Yeah.
director's cut, you have the theatrical cut. So there's different cuts of this story that exist out there. And I mean, we have a hunch about this, but
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see how that actually
Right.
plays out.
And I guess, this may be part and parcel with the previous question, but, for authors out there who might be watching this, and might want an opportunity to actually work with you, what is it that you look for in a story? And I know that changes, thematically from anthology to anthology, but what do you look for? What are the basic things you look for in a story that you're going to accept in one of your anthologies?
That's a very difficult question for me to answer.
I know.
And I'm gonna try really hard not to punt. Um, but maybe the best way for me to answer this is to talk about some of my editorial quirks. Um, so 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna read the ending of a story first, and I know that angers some authors
Sure.
because they're trying to set up an effect,
Right.
throughout this whole piece, and then I go and blow it. But I do it on purpose so that I'm not reading the story as a reader. I'm reading as an editor.
Sure.
And because I don't want to read it as a reader. I want
Right.
to, I want to, it trains me to think, I'm doing something different with my brain right now.
Well, I think that's great. I hadn't thought about it, but I think that's a great approach because then you go back, you see what the effect, you see what they're trying to achieve at the end of the story. And
Yep.
then you can go back and read the story and see how well they did in reaching that goal.
Right,
So
right.
I
So
yeah,
endings are really important to me. If you don't stick the landing with the ending, but more
absolutely.
important than that, what that does is it helps me to understand, again, kind of like you just hit on, does every piece of this story contribute to that moment?
Right.
Sorry, I've had a little bit of a cold, so I'm trying not to talk the microphone.
Very informal, so we're not worried about that.
And so it helps me to understand how the different pieces of the story resonate with each other and whether anything is extraneous. And so I would say that with that in mind, the stories that get my attention, it's not a certain subject matter, not even a certain style. It's how well is this thing constructed thematically, the narrative structure, and the pieces that turn me off tend to have a lot of extraneous stuff that doesn't contribute to that moment at the end.
Right.
And you can be subtle or you can be blatant about the way that those fit together, but it all ought to resonate. Like it should feel like a hermetically sealed bubble.
Right.
And every piece is essential. And so I know that's not a very practical, useful answer.
No, I think that
I stay deliberately open-minded.
Yeah, I think that that was well. I hadn't heard that before. That looking at the end first as as the person who's putting together this thing, and then going back and seeing how well the author has done in leading up to that end. And I think that's a great thing to think about for someone like me who's starting to do a few anthologies here and there, but also as an as an author. If there's authors out there listening to this, you're right, and you have that ending, and you should probably look at the story like that too before you let it loose in the wild. How well do I lead the reader down the path to get to this point? Is it a route that's going to be easy for the reader to follow to have that payoff? Or, because I think what a lot of writers are more concerned with is the payoff, is the end worth the story? And I think that that's an important consideration, but I think you can get caught up so much into that about whether the end is worth the read. But I think, the path is probably at least as important as all that. So I think that's a great little, I think that's a great tip. I really do.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that.
I don't know if it'll work for all editors, but for me, that's definitely what it helps me to understand the story in a way that I don't otherwise.
I think that's great, and I think that's do you have anything else you want to talk about? Anything else any little tidbits you want to release?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered pretty much everything and then some. So I thank you for spending time with me today. And
man, thank you. I appreciate it. I always love talking to you.
Likewise.
It's like, what I wanted to accomplish with this, and what I think we have is, these are the kind of conversations we have all the time. So I'm hoping that people who read this through the newsletter feel like a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Just listening to us chat about stuff that we chat about all the time anyway. So
absolutely. Yeah. And I want to verify that to say that this is very much the nature of the conversations that we have.
Right.
Not only when we're just BSing, but when we're talking shop about a story. Like it's casual, it's friendly. And if you're not getting that out of your editor, think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great place to end. So thank you, my friend. I know we'll be talking more off camera, as things progress, but yeah, I would say anybody out there who's listening to this, if you see a call from Bad Hand Books, this is a guy that you want to work with. So,
one more thing.
Yes.
Follow us on Twitter.
Oh yeah.
Bad Hand Books. Yeah. We're gonna have a lot of news in the next couple of months, And that's the best place to do it. I've got a Facebook page and an Instagram page, but I am much more active on Twitter. And so that's the best place to go do it. And if you want any Bad Hand merch,
the merch,
we've got Hag Cult's logo on shirts and stickers. And so if you go to badhandbooks.com, you can support what we're doing even before we have any books out.
That's great. Okay, so we're done. I'm going to hit unrecord now.